She slammed the bowl of soup down in front of the homeless man and hissed, "You can't just sit here all night like you own the place." And that's when the restaurant owner's son stepped out of the kitchen, went pale, and whispered, "Oh my God, that's Adrian Vale." Hey friends, where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. And when we're done, don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. The diner was warm in the way old places were warm, like the walls had been soaking up conversations for decades and refused to let them go. Neon lights buzzed softly in the front window. The smell of frying onions clung to everything. And behind the counter, Lila Hart moved like someone who'd been doing this her entire life. Even though she was only 26. She balanced 3 plates on one arm, slid a coffee refill onto a table without stopping, and offered a tired smile to a couple arguing quietly over pancakes like it was their weekly tradition. It was a Friday night rush. The kind of rush where nobody looked up. Nobody slowed down. Nobody noticed anything until it forced them to. So when the front door opened and the bell rang, most people didn't even turn. Except Lila. Because Lila always turned. Not because she was nosy. Because experience taught her that when a certain kind of person walked in, trouble followed. The man who stepped inside didn't look like trouble at first. He looked like weather. Like something that had been caught out in the cold too long. His coat was too big, too worn, and hung off him like he'd borrowed it from someone taller, heavier, more alive. His hair was a mess. His jaw was shadowed with stubble. And his eyes were the only part of him that looked expensive. Not rich. Not glittery. Just expensive. Like they'd seen places no one should have to see alone. He didn't hesitate. Didn't scan the room like he was looking for someone. He walked straight to the corner booth, the one nobody liked because it sat under the flickering light, and slid into it like he'd been there before. Like he belonged there. Lila's stomach tightened. Because she recognized that corner booth too. Not the booth itself. The pattern. People came in all the time looking for warmth they didn't want to ask for. And most nights, the staff handled it with the same exhausted routine. Ignore, tolerate, then eventually push them out. But tonight, Lila didn't get to decide how it went. Because Tessa saw him too. Tessa was new. Only 2 months in. And she had that kind of confidence that came from never once being wrong in her own head. She snatched a stack of menus and stalked toward the booth like she was marching into battle. Lila watched helplessly, still holding a tray, as Tessa stopped at the table and slapped a menu down. "What can I get you?" Tessa asked, too loud. The man didn't even open the menu. He didn't look at it. His hands were folded in front of him like he was waiting for a meeting. "I'm fine," he said quietly. Tessa blinked, like that wasn't an allowed answer. Then she leaned forward, voice sharp and bright like a blade. "Well, you can't just sit here. This is a restaurant, not a shelter." A few heads turned. Not many, but enough. And that's the thing about embarrassment. It doesn't need a full audience. It only needs witnesses. Lila's face heated instantly, like she was the one being scolded. She moved before she even thought. "Hey," she called, stepping toward them with her tray. "Tessa, I got that table." Tessa didn't look back. "No, you don't," she snapped. "I'm handling it." The man finally looked up. And for half a second, his gaze landed on Lila. Not pleading. Not angry. Just tired. Like he didn't even have the energy to defend his right to exist in public. Lila set the tray down hard on the counter. The plates clinked. "Excuse me," she said, walking over with a practiced calm she didn't feel. "Sir, would you like water? Or coffee?" Tessa's head whipped around. "Lila, stop. He's not ordering." Lila kept her eyes on the man. As if Tessa wasn't there. As if the staring customers weren't there. As if the room wasn't suddenly holding its breath. The man's voice was barely above a whisper. "Water's fine." Lila nodded gently. "Okay, I'll bring that right out." She turned away, but Tessa stepped in her path. "What are you doing?" Tessa hissed through a tight smile, The kind you wore when you wanted to look professional while losing your mind. You think you're Mother Teresa now? Lila lowered her voice. I'm doing my job. No, Tessa whispered, eyes flashing. You're letting him take advantage. He'll sit here all night, then what? We comp him food. He stinks. Lila froze. Because that last part wasn't even true. The man didn't smell bad. He smelled like cold air and rain and something faintly clean underneath it, like soap that had once been expensive. But Tessa had already decided the story. And the thing about people like Tessa was, once they decided what you were, they didn't let you become anything else. Lila exhaled slowly. Then she leaned toward Tessa and said, calm as cream in coffee. He's a person. Tessa scoffed. A person who isn't paying. He hasn't been given a chance to, Lila said. Tessa opened her mouth. But before she could say whatever cruel thing was brewing behind her teeth, a voice cut through from the kitchen entrance. Is there a problem out here? Lila turned, and the entire room seemed to shift when Calvin Dean stepped out. Calvin was the owner's son. He was tall, well-dressed, clean-shaven, and always looked like he was late to an important meeting even when he was holding a crate of tomatoes. He wiped his hands on a towel as he walked toward them. Then he saw the man in the corner booth. And whatever expression Calvin had been wearing, it disappeared. His body stiffened like someone had pulled a string through his spine. His hand tightened on the towel. And his face went pale. Calvin murmured, and it was the first time Lila had ever heard Calvin sound unsure of himself. Then, to Lila's absolute shock, Calvin walked faster. Not toward Tessa. Not toward Lila. Toward the man. Sir, Calvin said quietly. Respectfully. Like he'd suddenly forgotten this was a diner and not a boardroom. The man didn't look up. He didn't seem impressed. He didn't seem pleased. He just sat there, staring at the table like it was safer than anyone's eyes. Calvin swallowed. Then he turned sharply toward Tessa, voice low and urgent. Tessa, he said. Go help table 8. Now. Tessa blinked. But. Now, Calvin repeated, and the word wasn't loud, but it had weight. Tessa's mouth tightened. She looked at Lila like this was her fault, then spun around and walked away like she was 1 second from snapping her apron strings. The diner hummed again. But it was different now. Quieter. Nosier. Lila stood frozen beside Calvin, heart pounding. Calvin stared at the man like he was looking at a ghost. Then he leaned toward Lila and whispered, barely moving his lips. Oh my God! Lila! Lila's throat felt tight. What? Calvin's eyes were wide. Do you have any idea who that is? Lila glanced at the man again. He still looked homeless. Still looked tired. Still looked like someone the world had shoved into a corner booth and forgotten. No, she whispered. Calvin swallowed. That's Adrian Vale. Lila didn't know what to say, because the name meant nothing at first. Then suddenly everything clicked. Like a delayed explosion. Adrian Vale. As in Vale Hotels. Vale Resorts. Vale Capital. The billionaire who owned half the luxury properties in the city. The man whose face had been on business magazines and airport screens and those giant glowing billboards that made the rich look like they'd been carved from light. Lila stared at him. Her mind couldn't connect the name to the man sitting quietly in that booth. The man who hadn't raised his voice. The man who had just let himself be humiliated. Calvin whispered again, panicked now. My dad's been trying to get a meeting with him for 2 years. Lila's heart thudded painfully. And in the corner booth, Adrian Vale finally lifted his gaze. His eyes met Lila's. And for a second, it didn't feel like she was looking at a billionaire. It felt like she was looking at someone who'd been drowning so long. He forgot what air tasted like. Lila grabbed a glass of water with shaking hands and walked over. She set it in front of him carefully, like it might break. Here you go, she said softly. Adrian's eyes stayed on her face. Not rude. Not flirtatious. Just searching. And then, very quietly, like he didn't want anyone else to hear it. "Thank you," he said. It wasn't the kind of thank you people said for water. It was the kind of thank you people said for being seen. Lila swallowed hard. She forced a small smile. "You hungry?" she asked, even though her job wasn't supposed to include charity. Adrian hesitated, like he didn't know what he was allowed to want. Then he gave the smallest nod. Lila smiled gently, her voice low. "Okay, I'll bring you something warm." She turned toward the kitchen and caught Tessa watching from across the diner with an expression full of poisoned curiosity. And suddenly Lila knew two things at once. This wasn't going to be a simple act of kindness. Everyone was going to notice. Because the moment the most powerful man in the room chose the quietest waitress to look at, it wasn't just awkward anymore. It was dangerous. And it was already too late to pretend it didn't matter. Back at the counter, Lila grabbed a bowl of soup. Her hands shook. She whispered under her breath. "Okay, Lila. Great. Amazing. Perfect. You're about to serve soup to a billionaire who looks like he sleeps under bridges. Totally normal." And behind her, a small voice chimed in like a mischievous warning. "You're blushing," Milo said. Lila whipped around. "Milo!" she hissed. "What are you doing here?" Her 9-year-old brother stood by the pie case holding a comic book and grinning like he was witnessing history. "I told Mom I'm doing homework," Milo said proudly. "But I'm actually doing emotional research." Lila's eyes widened. "Milo, go sit down." Milo peeked over her shoulder at Adrian. Then he leaned in and whispered dramatically. "He looks sad." Lila swallowed. "Yeah," she whispered back, unexpected pain tightening her chest. "I know." Milo stared at Adrian another second, then shrugged like he'd decided something important. "I'm gonna adopt him," Milo announced. Lila nearly choked. "You cannot adopt a billionaire." Milo squinted. "Why not?" "Because he's already grown." Milo frowned. "So, emotionally he looks like he needs supervision." Lila clapped a hand over Milo's mouth so fast he squeaked. But when she looked up, Adrian Vale was watching them. And to Lila's horror, he looked like he was trying not to smile. And somehow, that tiny almost smile hit her harder than finding out he was rich. Because it meant he wasn't made of ice. He just hadn't been warmed up in a long time. And Lila, standing there with a bowl of soup and a complicated heartbeat, had the terrible feeling she'd just placed her hand on something fragile. Something expensive. Something lonely. And once you touch something like that, you didn't get to go back to normal. Not after this. Not after everyone saw. And most of all, not after he looked at her like that. The next morning, Lila woke up the way you wake up after a nightmare you can't fully remember. Heart already racing, like her body knew something her brain hadn't caught up to yet. She lay there staring at the ceiling of her tiny bedroom, listening to the muffled sounds of the apartment waking up. The kettle whistling. Her mom coughing in the bathroom. Milo humming off-key like he owned the world. And then it hit her again. Adrian Vale. Billionaire. Corner booth. Soup. That look in his eyes. And the way Calvin Dean had whispered his name like he was saying king. Lila pressed a pillow over her face and groaned. "This is not my life," she muttered into fabric. "This is not my genre." From the hallway Milo shouted, "Good morning to you too, drama queen." Lila didn't answer. Because she couldn't. She was too busy replaying the scene over and over, except every time she replayed it, it got worse in new ways. The way Tessa had said he stinks. The way Lila had jumped in without thinking. The way the entire diner had stared. And then the worst part. The fact that Adrian Vale had thanked her like she'd saved him. Like a bowl of soup had somehow held up the whole world. It made her feel warm and sick at the same time. Like getting hugged when you weren't expecting it. Like crying at the wrong time. By the time she got to work, Lila was running on caffeine and pure denial. She walked into the diner bracing herself for the fallout. And sure enough, it was already waiting. The moment she stepped through the swinging door, she felt it. Not yelling. Not drama. Just that heavy, sugary fake politeness people used when something huge happened and they didn't know how to act normal anymore. The cook, Benny, raised his eyebrows at her. One of the regulars paused mid-sip of coffee to watch her walk past. Even the old couple in booth 4, who normally only cared about their crossword puzzle, stared like Lila was suddenly a celebrity. She tightened her grip on her apron. Calvin was behind the counter with his phone pressed to his ear, pacing like he was trying to wear a hole into the floor. As soon as he saw Lila, his eyes widened with panic and he held up a finger like wait. He ended the call and rushed over. "Okay," he said quickly, voice low, like the walls had ears. "You're here." Lila blinked. "Yeah, I work here." Calvin ran a hand through his hair. His shirt was crisp, his watch shiny, his whole vibe screaming I slept 0 hours and drank 10 espressos. "We need to talk." Lila stepped back. "If this is about last night, it's about today," Calvin said. Lila's stomach dropped. "Today." Calvin leaned in. "He's coming back." Her heart did something stupid, like it wanted to be involved. Lila frowned. "Who?" Calvin gave her a look like she'd asked what color the sky was. "Adrian Vale," he said sharply. "He's coming back. Like, in person." Lila stared. "That doesn't make any sense," she whispered. "Why would he come back here?" Calvin's eyes darted around, then lowered again. "Because last night, after he left, he asked me something." Lila's throat tightened. "What did he ask?" Calvin swallowed. "He asked who you were." Lila went completely still. Her face warmed in an instant, spreading like a rash of embarrassment. "That's..." she struggled for words. "That's not, he didn't." Calvin shook his head with a weird half-smile. "He did." Lila felt her knees go weak. And of course, because God clearly had a sense of humor, Tessa walked by at that exact moment. She was carrying silverware, wearing the kind of smugness that could curdle milk. "Well, well," Tessa said, slow and sweet. "Look who's here." Lila didn't respond. Tessa stopped, eyes glittering. "I just want to say," she continued, loudly enough for 2 tables to hear, "some of us are trying to run a real business, and some of us are feeding strays." Lila's chest tightened, sharp like a paper cut. Calvin snapped. "Tessa." Tessa blinked innocently. "What?" "I'm just saying. We don't need a repeat of last night." Lila forced herself to breathe through her nose. "No. Not today." Not when her nerves already felt like exposed wires. She turned away and headed for the back room to tie her apron tighter, to hide her shaking hands, to remind herself she was just a waitress. A normal waitress. And billionaires didn't come back for soup. In the supply room, she leaned against the shelves and whispered to herself, okay, calm down. He is not coming back for you. He probably forgot your name already. People like him don't." But her voice trailed off. Because in her head, she could still hear his quiet thank you. The kind of thank you that meant he hadn't forgotten. She pulled her apron string tighter, too tight. Then she walked out like she wasn't about to combust. At exactly 11:17 a.m., the front bell rang. The entire diner went silent in a way that didn't happen even when a tray shattered. Every head turned. Lila froze mid-step. And there he was. Adrian Vale. But not the Adrian Vale from last night. This version looked like he belonged on the cover of a magazine that smelled expensive. Tailored charcoal coat. Crisp white shirt. Dark slacks. Shoes polished enough to reflect the floor. And his face. His face looked cleaner, sharper, more awake. But his eyes. His eyes were the same. Still heavy. Still distant. Still haunted in a way no amount of money could bleach out. For half a second, Lila didn't breathe. Because when someone looks that powerful, you can feel it. Like gravity changed in the room. Calvin rushed forward instantly, posture straight. "Mr. Vale," Calvin said, trying to sound casual and failing miserably. "Welcome back. We weren't expecting you so soon." Adrian's gaze moved calmly over the diner, like he was taking inventory. Then he said, flat and quiet. I'm here for the waitress. Calvin blinked. Adrian didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The one from last night, he clarified. Lila's blood rushed in her ears. Calvin turned slowly toward her like he was about to present her as an offering. Lila stood there holding a coffee pot like she'd forgotten how to be human. Adrian's eyes found hers. They locked. And suddenly it didn't feel like a diner. It felt like a private moment happening in public. Like the whole room had accidentally walked into something intimate. Lila forced herself forward. "Hi," she said, and immediately hated herself because why did she sound like she was greeting a guy she matched with on an app? Adrian's gaze softened. Just a fraction. "Hello," he said. 2 normal words. But the way he said them made her feel seen again. "I didn't think you'd come back," Lila blurted before her brain could stop her. Instant regret. She wanted to swallow her own tongue. Adrian's mouth twitched. Almost a smile, almost not. "I didn't think I would either," he admitted. That startled her. Not because it was romantic. Because it was honest. The man turned slightly, glancing at Calvin. "May we sit?" he asked, like he didn't own 10,000 chairs across the world. Calvin nodded too fast. "Of course. Anything you want. The corner booth is available." Adrian looked back at Lila. "I want the same booth." Lila's stomach flipped. Of course he did. Of course he wanted the corner. The place where nobody sat unless they didn't want to be noticed. Or, unless they wanted to remember something. Lila walked him over. The entire diner watched like it was a live show. Tessa's eyes followed them like knives. Adrian slid into the booth gracefully. Then, to everyone's shock, he waited. Like he wasn't going to speak until Lila did. Lila set down menus with hands that only slightly trembled. "So," she said carefully, "what can I get you today?" Adrian's eyes stayed on her face, calm but intense. "Coffee," he said. Then he paused, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to ask for more. "And soup." Lila swallowed. "Same soup." Adrian's voice went quieter. "If it's not inappropriate." That word hit her oddly. Inappropriate. Like he didn't know what he could take up space for. Like he was terrified of being unwanted again. Lila's heart clenched, then got angry at itself for clenching. "Soup isn't inappropriate," she said, trying to keep it light. "It's soup." For a second, his gaze warmed. He nodded once, and it was the smallest sign of relief. "Then yes," he said. "Same soup." Lila turned to leave, and nearly ran straight into Milo, who was standing by the booth like he'd been summoned. He was holding a juice box, wearing his backpack like a cape. Lila hissed, "Milo, why are you here again?" Milo didn't look at her. He looked at Adrian. He tilted his head like a tiny therapist. "You came back," Milo said. Adrian blinked slowly, surprised. "Yes," he replied. Milo frowned. "So you're not dead." Lila covered her face with a hand. "Oh my God." Adrian stared at Milo. Then, quietly, "No," Adrian said. "Not dead." Milo nodded, satisfied, then climbed into the booth beside Adrian like he'd known him for years. Lila reached for him. "Milo." Adrian lifted a hand gently. "It's fine," he said. Lila froze. Because the way he said it wasn't annoyed. It wasn't indulgent. It was grateful. Milo sipped his juice box loudly and said, like he was stating a scientific fact, "My sister likes sad men. She brings them soup." Lila made a strangled noise. "Milo!" Adrian's eyes flicked to Lila's in a way that made her chest burn. And, for the first time, he smiled. Not big, not happy, but real. And the whole diner noticed. Because when a man like Adrian Vale smiled, it didn't look casual. It looked rare. And if smiles like that were rare, then whoever caused them suddenly became important. Lila turned toward the kitchen, face on fire, and muttered to herself, "This is not happening. This is not happening." But in the booth behind her, she could hear Milo asking Adrian questions like a tiny interrogator. "Are you rich?" Lila whipped around. "Milo!" Adrian didn't flinch. He didn't lie. He just said quietly, "Yes." Milo nodded like that confirmed his entire worldview. "Okay," Milo said. "Then you can buy us a new microwave because ours sparks." Lila nearly dropped a tray. Adrian blinked, then looked at Lila. And the way he looked at her said something without words. "Is this what your life is like?" Lila wanted to laugh, cry, disappear. Instead, she brought the coffee. And as she set it down, Adrian said softly, "I didn't come back to cause trouble." Lila's throat tightened. She kept her eyes on the coffee cup. "Then why did you come back?" Adrian's voice lowered. "Because last night," he paused, searching for the words like they were foreign. "You treated me like I wasn't invisible." Lila's heart stumbled. The diner was still loud around them. Plates, forks, voices, but suddenly it felt quiet anyway. Adrian continued, barely audible now. "I don't remember what that feels like." Lila didn't know what to say. So she did what she always did when emotions got too big. She joked. "Well," she said softly, forcing a small smile, "our soup does have a reputation." Adrian's gaze stayed on her. Then he murmured, "I don't think it was the soup." And Lila felt her breath catch in a way she didn't want anyone to notice. Because that sounded like something else. Something warmer. Something dangerous. And across the diner, Tessa was watching. Calvin was watching. Customers were watching. Everyone was watching. And Lila suddenly understood something terrifying. If Adrian Vale kept coming back, this wouldn't stay small. It would become a story. A rumor. A scandal. A romance. Something she didn't feel ready for. Especially not with a man who looked like he'd forgotten how to be held. But might not survive being let go again. Lila backed away from the booth slowly, forcing herself to breathe. "I'll bring your soup," she said. Adrian nodded once. And Milo smiled up at her like he knew exactly what he was doing. "Tell her why you're really here," Milo told Adrian casually. Lila's eyes widened. "Milo, stop." Adrian stared at Milo, then back at Lila, expression tightening like the truth weighed too much. But he didn't answer. Not yet. And that silence, that delay, made Lila's stomach twist with anticipation. Because whatever he hadn't said was clearly the reason he came back. And she had the awful feeling it wasn't just about soup anymore. It was about her. And tomorrow, it would be even harder to pretend it wasn't. By the third day, the corner booth stopped feeling like furniture and started feeling like a stage. Lila didn't want it to. She didn't ask for it. But there was something about the way Adrian Vale sat in that same seat, at the same time, with the same quiet expression, that made the entire diner adjust itself around him. People spoke softer. They stared longer. They laughed too loudly at their own jokes like they were trying to prove they belonged in the same room as him. And Lila started timing her breathing. Because every time she walked toward that corner booth, her body did something humiliatingly hopeful. Not romantic hopeful. Not fairy tale. It was worse than that. It was the kind of hope you feel when someone lonely looks less lonely because of you. Like you'd become a small light in a life that looked very dark. And once you notice you can do that, you start craving it. That morning, she told herself she wouldn't. She told herself she'd be normal. She told herself this was just a billionaire killing time in a diner like it was some kind of sad rich person hobby. And then she pushed through the back door and found Tessa polishing menus like she was prepping for a royal inspection. That was new. Tessa normally treated menus like they were allergic. Lila paused. Tessa's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh," Tessa said brightly. "You're here." Lila's shoulders tightened. "Yeah." Tessa leaned against the counter like they were best friends. "Just so you know," she said, still smiling, "Calvin asked me to serve Mr. Vale today." Lila blinked. "He did." Tessa nodded, Smug. Hum. Makes sense, right? I mean, you already had your moment. Lila felt her chest pinch in a way she didn't expect. Had your moment. Like it was a trend. Like Adrian Vale was a customer you could pass around like a promotion opportunity. Lila forced her face to stay calm. Okay, she said. Good for you. But as she walked away, she heard Tessa mutter softly. Charity girls always think kindness is a personality. Lila stopped in the hallway. For one long second, she considered going back and saying something she'd regret. Then she didn't. Because she wasn't trying to win. She was just trying to survive. In the kitchen, Benny slid pancakes onto plates and raised his eyebrows at her. You okay? He asked. Lila nodded too fast. Yep. Benny snorted. That's the nope. Lila grabbed coffee mugs and told herself she didn't care who served Adrian today. She told herself she didn't care who he smiled at today. She told herself. The bell over the front door rang. And the entire diner did the same thing it always did now. It quieted. Lila froze. Because she didn't even have to look. She could feel him. That presence. That shift in the air like money had walked in and everyone wanted to pretend it didn't matter while acting like it mattered more than oxygen. Lila carried the mugs out slowly. And there he was. Adrian Vale, stepping inside like the diner belonged to him simply because he existed. Clean suit again, dark coat draped perfectly, hair neat, jaw sharp. But his eyes. His eyes went to the corner booth first. Then, immediately, to Lila. Like he was checking whether she was there before he let himself breathe. He didn't smile right away. It was subtler than that. His face just softened, as if some invisible weight loosened. Lila hated how much she noticed. Tessa was already moving, practically gliding toward him. Mr. Vale, she purred, voice sweet as syrup. Welcome back. Your usual booth. Adrian paused. He looked at Tessa. Then he looked past her, straight at Lila. It wasn't rude. It wasn't dramatic. It was just clear. Yes, Adrian said. Then, after a beat, he added. And I'd like Lila to serve me. The diner made a collective sound. Not words. Just breath. Tessa's smile twitched like it might crack. Lila's face burned. Adrian didn't even seem to notice the tension he'd just created. Or maybe he did. Maybe he just didn't care. Tessa recovered fast, of course. She always did. Well, she said, fake laughing. Of course. Anything you want. She walked away stiffly. Lila stood there holding coffee mugs like they were suddenly too heavy to lift. Benny whispered from behind the counter. Oh, girl. She's gonna murder you in your sleep. Lila hissed. Benny. Benny shrugged. Just saying. If you die, can I have your shifts? Lila wanted to laugh, but she couldn't. Because Adrian was already seated in the corner booth. Waiting. Not impatient. Not entitled. Just waiting like she mattered enough to be waited for. And that was the most terrifying kind of attention. Milo was already there too. Lila didn't even ask how. He'd somehow positioned himself 2 booths away, pretending to read a comic book upside down. The second Adrian sat down, Milo lifted his head like a meerkat. He pointed at Adrian. Then pointed at Lila. Then mouthed silently. Told you. Lila shot him a death glare. Milo grinned and went back to fake reading. Lila brought Adrian his coffee. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. Not because she was calm. Because she was numb. She slid the mug toward him. Coffee, she said. Adrian's gaze lingered on her face. Thank you, he said. The words always landed heavier than they should have. Lila cleared her throat. So, same soup again? Adrian's mouth twitched. I'm starting to think your soup is addictive, he said dryly. Lila blinked. Then, against her will, she smiled. Yeah, she said. It's the secret ingredient. Adrian raised an eyebrow. What is it? Lila hesitated. Then she leaned in, lowering her voice as if she was confessing something illegal. Judgment, she whispered. Adrian stared at her. Then he let out a short sound that wasn't quite a laugh. But it was close. Lila's stomach flipped. Oh no. Not laughter. That was worse. Because laughter felt like intimacy. She turned quickly, hiding her face. I'll get your soup, she said. As she walked away, she heard him murmur softly. I wasn't expecting you to be funny. Lila froze for half a beat. Then, without turning around, she muttered. I wasn't expecting you to keep showing up. She regretted it instantly. Because that sounded like something else. Something too honest. But she didn't take it back. She just kept walking. In the kitchen, she pressed a hand to her chest like she could physically push her heart back into behaving. Benny slid a bowl toward her. Soup for your billionaire. Lila hissed. Stop calling him that. Benny's grin widened. I'm sorry. Soup for your mysterious, emotionally wounded billionaire who clearly likes you. Lila glared. Benny leaned in. Just, don't forget. Rich men come with rich problems. Lila swallowed hard. Because she already felt it. The entire diner watching her. The whispers. The way people suddenly decided they knew her. And the way Tessa looked at her like she was something sticky under a shoe. When Lila brought the soup out, Milo had migrated to Adrian's booth. He was sitting across from him, elbows on the table like he was in a business meeting. Lila stopped. Milo, she warned. Milo didn't even look up. I'm negotiating. Adrian's eyes flicked to Lila with something like apology. He didn't move Milo. He didn't scold him. He just let him be there. Like he enjoyed the interruption. Lila set the soup down and tried to sound stern. Milo, go sit down. Milo sighed dramatically, like she didn't understand adult responsibilities. Fine, he said. But before he left, he leaned toward Adrian and whispered loudly enough for Lila to hear. Tell her. Or I will. Lila's spine went cold. What does that mean? She snapped. Milo gave her an angelic smile. Nothing. Then he hopped down and ran to the pie case like he'd done nothing. Lila stared after him, horrified. Then she looked at Adrian. Adrian's jaw tightened. He stared into his soup like it held answers. What is he talking about? Lila asked, quieter now. Adrian didn't respond immediately. And that silence, that hesitation, was worse than any answer. Because it meant Milo wasn't bluffing. Adrian finally lifted his gaze. His eyes looked tired today. Not sleepy. Just emotionally worn. I came back, he said slowly, because of something you said. Lila frowned. I said a lot. Adrian's mouth twitched faintly. I noticed, he murmured. Then he exhaled. Last night, he continued, you asked me if I was hungry. Lila nodded cautiously. Yes. Adrian's gaze dropped again. No one asks me that, he admitted. Lila stared. He went on, voice calm but stripped bare. They ask what I want. What I'm buying. What I'm investing in. What I'm building. He paused. No one asks if I'm hungry. Lila felt her throat tighten. That's, she started, then stopped. Because what do you even say to that? Adrian's eyes lifted again. And it made me realize, he said quietly, that I've been surviving, not living. Lila's chest ached. She forced herself to stay practical. So you came back because I asked if you wanted soup. Adrian watched her carefully. No, he said softly. I came back because you didn't look at me like a headline. Lila swallowed. Adrian reached into his coat pocket then, slow, deliberate. And the diner seemed to lean in. He pulled out a sleek black envelope. He slid it across the table toward her. Lila stared at it like it might bite. What's that? She asked. Adrian's voice was steady. An offer. Her stomach dropped. No, she said immediately. Adrian blinked. You don't even know what it is. I don't need to, Lila said, voice sharp with panic. No. Adrian's expression tightened. It's not a bribe. It feels like one, Lila whispered fiercely. Adrian's gaze held hers. For what? He asked quietly. For soup. Lila's voice broke. For making you feel something, okay? She instantly regretted saying it, because it sounded like she'd admitted she knew. That she'd felt the tension too. That she was as emotionally tangled as he was. Adrian didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, low. You think I'm trying to buy you? Lila's chest rose and fell too fast. I think, she said carefully, you don't know what else to do. That landed. Adrian's jaw flexed. His eyes flashed with something painful. Because she was right. He didn't know. He didn't know how to just be with someone. Not without money. Not without control. Not without deals. Lila pushed the envelope back toward him with shaking fingers. I don't want it, she whispered. Adrian stared at the envelope like it had betrayed him. Lila, he began. She cut him off softly. If you want to come here, she said, voice trembling but firm, then come here. Sit. Eat soup. Be whatever you are right now. Her eyes watered, embarrassing her. But don't hand me something shiny and pretend it's not heavy. Adrian's throat moved as he swallowed. He looked like he wanted to argue, like he wanted to insist. But he didn't. Instead, he nodded once. Slow. Reluctant. As if he'd just agreed to step into a world where he didn't have armor. And that scared him. Then Milo suddenly reappeared at Lila's side, like a tiny demon summoned by emotional tension. He looked at the envelope, then at Adrian, then at Lila. Oh, Milo said. The offer. Lila whispered. Milo. Milo ignored her and leaned closer to Adrian. Did you offer her a job? Milo asked. Adrian's expression went blank. Milo's eyes widened. You did, Milo gasped. That's so boring. You're a billionaire. Offer her something dramatic. Lila covered her face. Please stop talking. Milo turned to Lila, offended. I'm helping. Then he turned back to Adrian and said, deadly serious. If you want her to like you, you can't just throw money at her. You have to suffer a little. Adrian stared at Milo. Lila whispered through her fingers, I'm raising him wrong. Adrian's mouth twitched. Then, quietly, I'm starting to think he's right, Adrian murmured. Lila's heart stopped. What? She snapped. Adrian's gaze stayed on Milo, but his words were for Lila. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. The honesty hit her like a wave. Lila tried to swallow it down, tried to laugh it off. But she couldn't. Because for the first time since he walked into her diner, Adrian Vale sounded like a man who wasn't pretending. And the worst part was, Lila wanted to reach across that table and tell him it was okay. She wanted to make his life softer. But she didn't. Because softness was dangerous. Because she'd spent her whole life being soft and getting bruised for it. And the diner kept watching. The staff kept whispering. Tessa kept staring. And Lila knew, with a cold certainty in her stomach, this was going to turn into something public. Something messy. Something that would embarrass her before it comforted her. And Adrian. Adrian looked like the kind of man who could handle billion-dollar losses, but might not survive a simple rejection. As Lila turned away, Milo grabbed her sleeve and whispered, He's gonna do something big. Lila whispered back, Milo, please don't manifest things. But when she glanced over her shoulder, Adrian Vale wasn't looking at his soup anymore. He was looking at her like he'd made a decision. And Lila knew that tomorrow, the corner booth wouldn't just feel like a stage. It would feel like a spotlight. And she wasn't sure she could breathe in that kind of light. The next morning, Lila woke up with the strange hollow dread of someone who knew their life was about to be discussed by strangers. Not in a dramatic way. In that slow, humiliating way where people didn't ask you questions. They just decided answers. She lay in bed for a long minute, staring at the corner of her ceiling where paint had peeled into the shape of a small cloud. Milo used to call it the sad potato. Her mom's voice floated in from the kitchen. Lila. Sweetheart. You're gonna be late. I'm up, Lila called, even though she wasn't emotionally up. She was just awake. She rolled out of bed and padded into the kitchen. Her mom was at the table, hunched slightly, rubbing her wrist like it hurt. Her cough sounded deeper today, like it had settled somewhere it didn't want to leave. Milo was already dressed, swinging his legs, eating cereal with the smug confidence of a kid who'd accidentally become the mastermind of an adult romance. He looked up at Lila as she walked in. Today's the day, Milo announced. Lila paused. For what? Milo leaned forward, eyes shining like a psychic. He's gonna do the thing. Lila's stomach tightened instantly. What thing? Milo shrugged like it was obvious. The billionaire thing. Lila opened her mouth, then closed it. Because arguing with Milo was like arguing with weather. You couldn't stop it. You could only endure it. Eat your cereal, she muttered, grabbing her bag. Milo held up his spoon like a wand. Just saying, he sang. Corner booth magic. Lila shot him a glare. But her mom looked up from her tea and frowned gently. You okay, honey? Her mom asked. Lila forced a smile. Yeah, just tired. Her mom's eyes softened, like she didn't believe her, but wasn't going to push. That diner takes too much out of you, her mom murmured. Lila's throat tightened. Because she wanted to say, it's not the diner. It's him. But she didn't. Instead she kissed her mom's forehead and said, I'll be back after my shift. Milo called after her as she left. Don't let him buy you a car. Lila's entire soul cringed. Go to your school, she shouted back, cheeks burning. By the time she arrived at the diner, Lila had already decided. Today she would be cold. Not cruel. Not rude. Just controlled. Because she couldn't do that thing again where Adrian looked at her like she was the only person in the room who mattered. She couldn't carry that. Not when her life was already heavy. Not when her mom's medical bills lived like ghosts in her wallet. Not when she still felt humiliated by the way people stared. The moment she stepped inside, she knew something was different. The diner was buzzing. Not loud buzzing. Nervous buzzing. Like everyone had drunk coffee and swallowed gossip whole. Benny caught her eye and lifted his eyebrows dramatically. Calvin was pacing again, phone in hand, looking like he'd seen the inside of a stress dream. And Tessa was smiling. That was the worst sign. Because Tessa only smiled like that when she knew something you didn't. Lila walked behind the counter. What's going on? She asked Benny. Benny leaned in, whispering with the reverence of a priest. He called. Lila froze. Who called? Benny gave her a look. You're Billionaire. Lila's stomach dropped. Calvin hurried over, eyes wide. Lila, he said quickly. Okay, don't freak out. I'm already freaking out, she whispered. Calvin lowered his voice. He reserved the entire diner for 2 hours. Lila blinked. What? Calvin nodded like his neck was tired. For lunch. Starting in 15 minutes. Closed to the public. Full staff paid. Everything comped. Lila's blood went cold. Why? She whispered. Calvin swallowed. He didn't say. Tessa slid in beside them, voice syrupy. Oh, I think we know why, she said sweetly, eyes flicking over Lila like she was inspecting her. Lila ignored her. Calvin continued, nervous. And, Lila, he added. What? Lila's voice was sharp. Calvin hesitated. He requested you be the only server. Lila's chest tightened violently. No. Calvin looked helpless. He's Adrian Vale. I don't care, Lila said, shaking her head. I said no to his offer. I'm not doing this. Calvin whispered. I can't say no to him. Lila's eyes stung. That's your problem, she snapped, then instantly regretted it because Calvin didn't deserve her panic. She turned away, heart pounding. Benny called after her. If he proposes, I need it on video. I will throw a plate at you, she shouted without turning around. Lila stormed into the supply room and pressed her forehead to the shelf. Her breath came too fast. Her brain went too loud. Okay, she whispered to herself. Okay. This is fine. This is not romantic. This is a power move. This is him controlling the setting. Because that's what billionaires did. They controlled. They bought silence. They bought privacy. They bought moments. And Lila did not want to be bought. She squeezed her eyes shut. Then she heard the bell at the front door ring. Not the usual busy jingle. This one sounded deliberate. Lila's heart clenched. She walked back out slowly. And there he was again. Adrian Vale. But today he wasn't wearing the same charcoal suit. Today he wore a dark navy one that made him look even more like the man on the billboards. His hair was perfect. His jaw clean-shaven. He looked composed. Like the billionaire everyone expected. But his eyes betrayed him. They searched for Lila instantly. When he found her, something in his posture eased, almost imperceptibly. Like he'd been holding his breath until she arrived. Lila forced herself not to soften. She walked to him, hands clasped behind her back like she was trying not to shake. "What are you doing?" she asked. Adrian blinked slowly, like the question was fair. "Good morning," he said quietly. Lila didn't answer. Her silence made his gaze sharpen. He nodded once, as if accepting her mood. "I wanted to talk," he said. Lila's laugh came out bitterer than she intended. "So you rented the diner?" Adrian's jaw flexed. "Yes," he admitted, not defensive. "Just honest." Lila crossed her arms. "That's not normal." Adrian's eyes stayed on her, steady. "No," he agreed. "It's not." And somehow that calm agreement made her angrier. Because she'd prepared for excuses. For charm. For manipulation. But he wasn't doing any of that. He looked like a man trying to cross a bridge without falling. "Lila," he said softly. "I'm not trying to trap you." She scoffed. "This feels like trapping." Adrian's eyes flicked down, then up again. "I didn't know how else to get time with you, without an audience." Lila froze. Because that was the one reason she couldn't argue with. She hated the audience too. Before she could respond, Milo burst through the back door like a tiny hurricane. "Ha ha!" Milo shouted, out of breath. "I knew it!" Lila's soul left her body. "Milo!" she shrieked. Milo ran up to the counter, still wearing his backpack. "I told you he'd do the billionaire thing." Milo announced to the entire empty diner like he was delivering breaking news. Adrian's eyes widened slightly. Lila hissed, "Why are you here?" "It's a school day." Milo puffed up proudly. "I told my teacher I had an emergency." Lila stared. "What emergency?" Milo pointed dramatically at Adrian. "Him." Lila pressed her fingertips to her temples. Adrian looked startled. Not annoyed. Just unfamiliar with being invaded by a child who didn't fear him. Milo walked straight up to Adrian and squinted at him like he was inspecting a product. "You look better," Milo said bluntly. Adrian blinked. "Thank you." Milo nodded. "Good. My sister doesn't like when men look like dead ghosts." Lila made a sound halfway between a scream and a laugh. "Milo, stop." But Milo wasn't done. He leaned in closer to Adrian and whispered loudly, "Did you come to fix her life?" Lila froze. Adrian's face changed. Not dramatically. But something moved behind his eyes. Like that question hit too close. He looked at Lila again, and for the first time, he looked uncertain. Then he answered Milo honestly. "I came to try," Adrian said quietly. Lila's chest tightened so hard it almost hurt. Milo grinned. "Okay," Milo said, satisfied. "Then don't mess it up." Lila grabbed Milo by the backpack and dragged him away. "You are going to school right now." Milo flailed. "I have to witness love." "There is no love," Lila hissed. Milo leaned close to her ear and whispered like he was delivering a threat. "There will be." Then he skipped toward the door like he'd done nothing. Lila stood there, humiliated beyond words. Adrian watched her with something like tenderness. And that tenderness was unbearable. Because tenderness made her want to forgive him. And she wasn't ready to forgive him. She turned back to him. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. Adrian inhaled slowly. Then he did something that made Lila's stomach drop. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out the black envelope again. The offer. Lila's jaw tightened immediately. "No." Adrian held up a hand. "Please," he said softly. "Just listen." Lila's voice shook. "If you hand me that again, I swear to God I'll quit." Adrian's eyes softened. "I'm not handing it to you," he said quietly. He set it on the table between them. Then he slid it away from her, like he was removing it from the conversation. Lila blinked, caught off guard. Adrian swallowed. "I didn't understand something," he said, voice low. "About you. About this." He looked at the envelope like he hated it. "In my world," he continued, "money is how people apologize." Lila's throat tightened. He looked back up at her. "But you don't want an apology," he said softly. "You want presence." The word landed like a hand on her heart. Lila couldn't breathe for a second. Adrian's voice grew rougher. "I'm not good at that." Lila stared at him, silent. He went on. "When people talk about me," Adrian said, "they talk like I'm a machine. Like I don't feel things." His jaw clenched. "I let them." He swallowed hard. "Because when I lost her," his voice broke slightly. He hated it immediately. He blinked once, gathering himself. "I didn't know what to do with feelings anymore." Lila's eyes stung. She whispered, "Her." Adrian's gaze flicked away. "My wife," he admitted. The word hit Lila like cold water. Not jealousy. Not relief. Just context. Sudden understanding for the emptiness in his eyes. Lila's voice came out softer before she could stop it. "I'm sorry." Adrian shook his head. "No," he said, almost fierce. "Don't. People say that like it's a napkin to wipe grief away." He exhaled slowly. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy," he said. "I'm telling you because you deserve to know why I froze yesterday." Lila's stomach tightened, remembering. The gossip. The whispers. The moment Adrian heard it and said nothing. The silence that hurt more than Tessa's words. Adrian's voice lowered. "I heard them," he admitted. Lila's throat tightened. "So why didn't you say anything?" Adrian's jaw flexed like he hated himself. "Because when I'm emotional," he said slowly, "I disappear." Lila's eyes watered. "That's convenient," she whispered, hurt. Adrian flinched like she slapped him. "It's pathetic," he corrected quietly. "And I hate it." He leaned forward slightly, voice almost pleading but restrained. "You looked at me like a human being," he said. "And I panicked." Lila's chest burned. She wanted to say something sharp. Something protective. Instead she whispered. "Then stop panicking." Adrian stared. Lila continued, voice shaking. "You don't get to come into my life and make me feel something and then disappear when it gets uncomfortable." Adrian nodded once. "Yes," he whispered. "You're right." And that agreement, that quiet acceptance, made Lila's anger unravel into something scarier. Because it meant he wasn't trying to win. He was trying not to lose. Lila breathed out slowly. "So what is this?" she asked, gesturing around the empty diner. Adrian swallowed. "This," he said, "is me trying again." Lila's eyes stung. Adrian reached into his pocket again, but this time it wasn't the envelope. It was a folded paper. He slid it toward her. Lila hesitated, then unfolded it slowly. Her brow furrowed as she read. Then her mouth parted. Her throat tightened. It wasn't a check. It wasn't a job offer. It wasn't a contract. It was a confirmation page. For a medical clinic. A specialist. An appointment. Her mother's name printed neatly at the top. Lila's hands went numb. Her voice barely worked. "What is this?" Adrian's voice was very quiet. "Your mother," he said. "She needs help. Real help. Not wait 6 months help." Lila stared, stunned, heart pounding. "I didn't tell you my mom's name," she whispered. Adrian's jaw tightened. "I asked Calvin," he admitted. "I asked, without telling him why." Lila's chest burned. She should have been angry. She should have felt invaded. But all she could feel was shock. And a kind of shaky relief. Because her mom's cough had been getting worse. And Lila had been pretending she didn't hear it. Adrian continued, voice careful. "I'm not paying her bills," he said. "I'm not doing some dramatic gesture in public." He swallowed. "I just made sure she could be seen." Lila's eyes blurred. Her hands trembled over the page. "Why?" she whispered. Adrian looked at her. And the answer wasn't romantic. It wasn't smooth. It was honest. "Because you take care of everyone," he said softly. "And no one is taking care of you." Lila's breath caught. That was the moment. Not the money. Not the appointment. Not the billionaire power move. The moment was that he'd noticed her. The way her shoulders carried the world. The way she kept smiling anyway. She blinked hard, trying not to cry. "I can't accept this," she whispered. Adrian didn't argue. He just said quietly, "You already are." Lila's chest tightened. She whispered fiercely, tears slipping anyway. "Don't do this," she said. "Don't make me owe you." Adrian's eyes softened, and for the first time, he looked afraid. "I don't want you to owe me," he said quietly. "I want you to. Let me be here." Lila stared at him like the words didn't make sense. He was Adrian Vale. He could buy entire lives. But he was asking for permission to simply exist beside her. In the diner. In her world. Without control. Without money as armor. Lila's voice came out smaller. "And what about the gossip?" she whispered. "The people who think I'm..." Adrian's gaze sharpened. His voice went colder, focused. "Then I'll fix that," he said. Lila's stomach dropped. "How?" Adrian stood. The movement made her instinctively tense. He walked toward the center of the diner. And Lila realized with horror. The front windows were full of people. Regulars. Neighbors. Passers-by. They'd noticed the diner was closed. They were peeking in. Watching. Waiting. Lila's chest tightened. No. No, no, no. Not public. Not loud. Not humiliating. Adrian turned toward the windows. He didn't open the door. He didn't invite them in. He simply stood where they could see him. Then he spoke. Calmly, clearly, with a voice that didn't need shouting to command attention. He pointed toward Lila. "This woman," he said. Every head outside leaned in. Lila felt like she might throw up. Adrian continued, his voice steady. "She didn't help me because she wanted money." He paused. "She helped me because she's kind." Lila squeezed her eyes shut. He wasn't done. "And if anyone thinks they can turn that kindness into a rumor," Adrian said, gaze hard now, "then you can explain it to me." The people outside stiffened. Some looked ashamed. Some looked fascinated. Some looked like they wanted to clap. Lila's cheeks burned. But in the middle of the humiliation, something shifted. Because Adrian wasn't saving her. He wasn't claiming her. He wasn't making her a trophy. He was drawing a boundary around her dignity. And he did it without making her feel owned. Adrian turned back to Lila and walked slowly to the booth again. He sat down. Like he wasn't trying to be dramatic. Like he was just choosing her again. Lila stared at him, breath shaking. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. Adrian's gaze held hers. "Yes," he said quietly. "I did." Lila's throat tightened. She looked down at the appointment page again. Then she looked back at him, eyes wet. "You can't just keep doing things like this," she whispered. And expect me to fall into you? Adrian nodded once. I'm not expecting that, he said softly. He hesitated. Then he added, voice low. I just want you to stop running every time you feel something. Lila froze. Because that was what she did. She ran inside herself. She hid behind jokes. She locked her feelings in a freezer with the frozen fries. And Adrian had noticed. She swallowed hard. Then she whispered. Tomorrow, she said. Adrian's breath caught slightly. What? Lila's voice trembled, but she held his gaze. If you want to keep coming here, she said softly, come back tomorrow. It wasn't a yes. Not fully. Not romantically. Not safely. But it was an opening. Adrian stared at her like she'd just handed him something priceless. He nodded once. Slow. Careful. Like he was afraid to break it. I'll come back, he promised. Lila exhaled shakily. And behind the pie case, Milo suddenly popped up like a gremlin, whispering to Benny. She said tomorrow. I win. Benny whispered back. Kid, you're terrifying. Milo grinned. Lila heard it. She groaned, wiping her face. But when she looked back at Adrian, he was smiling again. Not sad this time. Not haunted. Just quietly happy. And that was when Lila realized. This wasn't going to be a one-time miracle. This wasn't going to be a dramatic rescue. This was going to be a slow, messy, public love story, where the richest man in the city kept returning to the same corner booth, just to be near the only woman who didn't treat him like a headline. And tomorrow, everyone would notice again. But Lila wasn't sure she wanted to hide anymore. If you made it all the way to the end, I just want to say you're officially part of the family now. So tell me, what city are you watching from today? And be honest. Rate this story from 0 to 10. Also, should Lila forgive Adrian completely? Or should she make him prove it longer? Guys.